Hi, Jacqueline.
Hello,
Welcome to
hi.
this podcast series. Would you mind if I call you Jackie?
Absolutely, no problem.
Thank you, and please call me Mel if you like.
Okay.
It's nice to talk to you again. It's nice to see you again. And thanks for doing this series, which really looks into communications and how different leaders, look at their communication styles. So, Jackie, you've had a very long and distinguished career in the public service, taken on different roles as well. Could you tell us a bit more about your journey? And I guess, over these years, how has your communication style, your own personal communication style, how has it evolved over then?
I've had many roles in the public service. Some have been very front-facing, very similar to what I'm doing now with the Economic Development Board. Some have been very much more internally facing, where you basically speak to either very specific groups of the public or your own staff. And over the years, I've kind of realized that there are many different kinds of communication styles. There is the one-is-to-many communication style, where you're basically downloading something to a large audience.
Sure.
And they almost never have any opportunity to respond. That's just one kind of approach where you need to understand your audience and just see who is nodding, who is smiling, and then how really to kind of segment them up so that you can get your point through. And then there's the sort of one-is-to-few communication style. And that's to a much smaller audience. And for that, there tends to be a lot more interaction. Usually there's Q&A, and there is actually a more integrative process of bringing their views into bear as well as your own. And then there's, of course, the one-is-to-one communication style, like what we're having now.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that one's a lot more banter. And that one has a lot more discovery and free play to it.
Absolutely. I quite enjoy the one-to-one and the free play part. I guess that's also owing to my own background as a journalist. But what's your personal favorite amongst the three?
I don't have a personal favorite, actually. I think that over the years, you just learn to listen more and derive more out of what you are getting from an audience or getting from the other person you're talking to. The other thing that I've learned in the many years that I've, sort of been looking at communicating to different audiences has been that for the Singapore public, very often listening is very important, and also getting ahead of the curve in terms of putting out public communications. And that may be even when the communication is negative. So, of course, you should continually put out positive communication so that people understand why you're doing it, or why the government is doing something, or that agency is doing something, so that way ahead of anything else happening, there is already a perception amongst members of the public about what you are up to, why you're doing it, and why it benefits them. But when things go bad, and sometimes they do, and I've had cybersecurity incidents or disruptions, especially when I was looking at government technology. It's really important to actually be very proactive in getting your message out.
Absolutely.
Even when it doesn't feel that you want to go out there and say something.
Yeah.
It's far more important to
Absolutely.
be really, really upfront and explain things before anyone asks you why this is happening or why this bad thing is happening.
Absolutely. I think the speed is crucial in the time of crisis or when there's an issue to settle. Thanks, Jackie. We now move on to the fact that, I've heard from many of the colleagues you've worked with over the years, that you have a knack for simplifying complex issues and concepts. And that's really great. I think as a communicator myself, I think that's a very difficult skill to master. And you do get to the heart of the matter rather quickly and clearly as well. So from your own point of view, how important is it to, communicate simply? And why do you think it's an important trait of effective leadership?
I wouldn't say that I'm the best communicator out there.
You're being humble.
But I actually have listened to a lot of leaders and a lot of... I listen to a lot of podcasts, and actually you get a lot of inspiration from podcasters.
You do, yeah.
On how to keep things tight and how to convey your point in a simple but really evocative manner that gets everyone's attention. I think one of the things I have learned from all these other experiences and all these people that I've been learning from is that, keep the number of points short. 3 points would probably be the best. And actually just having some mnemonic, the sort of notion of like repeating the same thing 3 times, but in different ways, so that people remember what you're trying to say, but around the same topic actually really helps. I think a lot of people underestimate the extent to which it is difficult for an audience to imbibe what you're saying, and that the speaker is often in possession of a large amount of information that they have already digested in their head, and everyone else is just trying to keep up with that. So there is this thing called the magic number of things that you can keep in your mind at any one time and then repeat after that. So there was quite a well-known study where individuals were asked to sort of remember a number of things and then recall them after that. And they found that the average number of things that any one individual could recall was 7. In other words, there is never any point in telling people more than 7 things at a time because they can't remember them. And in the long run, actually having your audience remember what you said is often a lot better than having your audience listen to everything that you want them to hear.
Absolutely.
So, a rule of 3, a maximum of 7, I think is one of the things that might help with simplifying communication.
I like the point about 7. The next time my wife tells me I can't keep things in my mind, I'll use that. But jokes aside, I mean, the power of 3 is something that I've come across quite a lot. You and many other leaders use that quite well. And it's something I think that our audiences would like to take note of as well. Whether why is it at this point or this power of 3 sits well in people's minds, and why is it that all effective and good communicators use it religiously, in fact. So that's a great point. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So going back to Jackie, the point about simplifying a message, and you shared this concepts that you use. Could we ask you an example from your career where you think you had to simplify a message, and why this was crucial, and how did you approach it?
I think that the first thing you need to do when you approach an audience is to figure out, in digital terms, when we used to do digital applications, we used to always ask ourselves the question, what does the user need? And in the case of communicating, especially complex or difficult messages, it's what does the audience need? And in many cases, you have to meet them at their level and respect them at all points of time, and respect the emotions that they might be feeling when receiving your message, and respect that they are able to understand what you're trying to convey, as even if it is fairly difficult or complicated, as long as you take the time to go through the key elements that hook them into wanting to hear this message. So some of the ways that it's possible to do that are actually, possibly telling a story. Starting off with kind of like a story of why this is important to them, why a policy change might be necessary at a certain point of time, and then sort of to narrow it into how that, really affects them individually, more than a statistic.
Yeah.
So in many speeches, we do often find, and I'm still guilty of that, I rattle out statistics.
Well, it's a part of your job.
It is.
Yeah.
And I find that businesses are okay with it. They like to know that ASEAN will be the 4th largest economy by 2030. That kind of gets them.
Sure.
But when you talk to individuals, they kind of respond at a different level. They are far more receptive to emotions, stories, and things that resonate with their daily lives.
Yeah.
So even when giving a message such as reemployment. So we were rolling out a piece of legislation many years ago. We had a retirement age and a Retirement Age Act, but we were going to change it to the Retirement and Reemployment Act.
Sure.
So we were trying to introduce a concept that no one had understood before, and that was the concept of reemployment. And it was extremely novel. It had only been done in Japan before, where we had learnt it. And it involved retiring at a certain age and then requiring employers to consider re-employing the same individual, but perhaps in a different role with a different pay, and allowing for succession at the same time as ensuring that the individual remained employed.
Yeah.
So this is an example, actually, not that I started, but actually one of our political office holders at that time did, which I thought really summarized why it was so powerful. Instead of saying 10% of you will be, needing a job at this time or be above a certain age at this time, he said there are 10 of you in the front row of this auditorium. 3 of you will be above this age by what year? 2 of you will need this. 1 of you will have, an illness or something that needs to take care of. How many? So instead of giving a statistic, he pointed to the people in the front row.
That's very clever.
And I thought that was very evocative, and it made it immediately hit home. And even if you weren't in the front row, you suddenly thought, well, there are 5 people on my left and 4 people on my right, and what does that mean for me?
You could relate to that immediately.
Yes.
And exactly that's the point, because you've spoken today a lot about knowing your audience and customizing your communications, content and style to the audiences, and sometimes that's a challenge because audiences could be diverse, such as these, and landing on the right stories, landing on the right anecdotes and the right points. It can be tricky because what could relate or associate to one person may actually turn the other person off. So, that's the example you just shared was a very clever one because, he reached out to a very diverse group of people, and everyone in that audience, no matter whatever their background or their role in this whole equation, I guess, felt that he was talking to them.
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. So on that note, Jackie, how do you do your homework in terms of knowing your audience and making sure that your content is tailored and sent across in the right way?
Yeah, we deal with a lot of different audiences in the public service as well as in, EDB. Certainly we deal with foreign investors, and they come from many different countries. We deal with young people. We deal with older people. We deal with a domestic audience. We deal with our own sort of politicians. And we deal with our own internal audiences in terms of being leaders of organizations.
Sure.
So actually there are many, many things that you need to tailor along the way. I think the first I would suggest is cultural context, particularly when you're dealing with people from different geographies. And for us, we deal with Japanese executives and American executives and Nordic executives and Southeast Asian executives, and they have a very, very different cultural context for communication. For example, some cultures are a lot more deferential, and they need a lot of warming up before you get to the point. And others are extremely relational. So there is a lot of relational work that needs to take place before, a deal is done. And then others, of course, extremely straightforward. So almost transactional. And the communication is as such. There's also the notion of industry context. I realized that people in different industries actually communicate a little bit differently. So on the Design Council, we deal with designers, and designers are actually a lot more creative in their expectations of how you communicate. And then we deal with semiconductor executives who are very, very much more cut and dried, and they like the more engineered style. And finally, the third context is age. There's a big age context.
Sure.
Young people, so young people these days communicate differently.
We're both young.
Oh, sure.
Younger.
You're younger than me.
Younger people.
There is a difference in the way I think that communications is perceived And in many ways, that can lead to misunderstandings.
Sure.
So something that you say to perhaps a 60-year-old doesn't carry so well with a 20-something in the workforce. And we do know that a lot of our younger officers are a little bit more sensitive or aware of various issues that have a lot of cultural context for their generation. And sometimes, being from in a multi-generational workforce, you have also got to watch to see that neither the sensitivity dominates nor, not paying attention to some of these nuances.
No, I suppose that's very important for a place like EDB in particular, where you face the world.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
One of the things that is helpful is, I suppose, when you're addressing a group that you think has a certain preconception, is to just draw that out immediately.
Okay.
If they are feeling that, Singapore is a certain way, or that we have a certain agenda, or they have a grievance.
Yes.
I think a lot of the sting can be drawn out of that by starting off whatever you're communicating with just raising that point, by just saying, I know you feel this way. I know you have an issue with this. I totally understand where you're coming from on this.
Yeah.
And when you see people start to nod, you know that at least you have acknowledged how they're feeling, and then you can move to the next step, which is what you need or what they need and what your asks might be of each other.
And that's a great point. I think, earning that trust, not just, putting the cards out on the table, but earning that trust, I guess, is what forms authentic communication as well. And that, I guess, creates also the idea that you are an authentic leader, to somebody who you're talking to.
Yeah.
So on this note of diverse audiences, Jackie, I mean, I think one thing that I've come to realize is that the message that goes out by communicators or people who are communicating can be received in very different ways. So, somebody as public as you, for instance, sometimes you might have to communicate with extreme humility more than you need to, and show empathy and also, emotions. To others, that might perceive, how your show of strength differentiates from what they think a leader should be. So in today's world, how do you think one can square off as a communicator, as a leader, where you strike a fine balance within showing the emotional side of things, but also humility, but at the same time also come from a point of strength?
I don't really think in terms of strength or humility. I think in terms of authenticity.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
And confidence. I think that if you know your stuff and you are representing a well-considered point of view, and in many cases, the Singapore government spends a lot of time figuring out what their point of view is, having researched an issue in many, many different angles. And actually, the confidence is there that a lot of considerations have been taken in before decisions are made or before pronouncements are made. So along those lines, I think if empathy is something that is needed to convey that, first, there's an understanding of the situation, and then, the way that it's being dealt with is then conveyed with confidence. I think it blends both of these approaches. So I don't think there's a strong way or a humble way of doing this, but there's a real way. And if you keep it real and you are able to communicate to your audience, you understand their concerns, or if something went wrong, you know that it went wrong and could be fixed. But at the same time, know what actually went right, who needed to be praised for what they did, and how everyone could move forward in a confident manner. I think it is entirely possible to combine all these approaches together in an authentic and real manner.
Yeah. And I guess being real also allows people to then, associate that that's who you are, right?
Yeah, because nowadays there are so many forms of media. There's social media, there's the traditional media. It's not possible to, be one thing on one form of media to one audience and not have the same message leak out to another audience. There's a huge amount of porosity, and I would give full respect to all audiences that they can easily spot a fake. So it's just easier actually to keep it real.
Absolutely. I think today people are a lot more discerning as consumers of content and information. And I think you're right, authenticity shines through. Yeah. So Jackie, thanks a lot for spending time with us. I picked up some really important nuggets of wisdom on communication. But before you go, we have one final question that I hope you will share with our viewers and listeners back home. And that's really about the message or the advice you might have for aspiring leaders out there, in terms of communication. How can they be better communicators? And how can they make communication an integral and important part of their leadership toolkit?
Yeah, I do think that everyone is a work in progress. I certainly am a work in progress where this is concerned as well. So actually one of the key things that almost anyone can benefit from, and I do this a lot, is to get feedback. Mm-hmm. Constantly get feedback, keep listening to the people you are talking to. Did they receive the message? What were their emotions? What were their feelings when they received that message? If it was something that they needed to do, did they do it? If there was a way in which they wanted to communicate back to you, was there a way in which they could do it? I suppose when I was a bit younger, I had someone tell me that I had been communicating a series of messages to a new organization that I was in, and I was very confident that they had received it. And this person who was sort of assisting with the organizational development said, you keep saying they should know. I told them. I told them they should know already.
Yeah.
And in fact, they did not know already. They were all interpreting what I said in different ways. And they were all telling each other different things. Mm. And I hadn't really taken the opportunity to really get that feedback at that point of time so that any corrections could be made or emphasis could be done, because very often you need to communicate something more than once for it to be received and acted on in the way that you wished that it would be acted on. So I would say feedback, listening is the best thing for anyone to understand whether or not they are communicating in a way that is received.
Yeah. No, that's a very interesting point. I think a lot of us are guilty of that. I know I am as well. So it's a great point. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I think it's great chatting with you.
Thanks.
And all the best for your future endeavors and whatever you're doing currently at EDB as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.